Right, there we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the Chamber Educational Series, Systems and Systems Thinking. The Duluth Chamber is grateful to provide this free offering free of charge to our members because of the generosity of the sponsor of the College of St. Scholastica. At this time, Rick Revore from the College of St. Scholastica will deliver a brief introduction. Rick?
Thanks, Jeba. My name is Rick Revore. I serve as Dean of Strategic Development at St. Scholastica. I'd like to thank Jeba and her team for offering this series, and the Stender School is honored to sponsor it. Just a quick update on the College of St. Scholastica. We're finishing a brand new $17 million student center that we're going to open in August, and we look forward to welcoming students back to that new center. We're also enrolling students for our fall start in our online programs, including a Master's in Applied Data Analytics, MBA in Leadership and Change, and our Master's in Social Work. We also have online undergraduate programs in psychology, social work, and a variety of business programs. If you have any questions, please let me know. And finally, thanks to Bob Hartl for presenting today. Bob is a really key member of the St. Scholastica community. He's the founder of our MBA in Leadership and Change program. He's been a mentor to me and many in the Duluth community. So Bob, thank you so much for presenting today.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Rick. Let me introduce you first, Bob.
Okay.
I know we're excited.
Oh, I'm chomping at the bit.
It's okay, my friend. So I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker today, Bob Hartl, who is the Associate Professor of Management at the College of St. Scholastica. Bob is the founder of the MBA in Leadership and Change, an avant-garde master's degree at the College of St. Scholastica. The program is steeped in the principles of organizational development, OD, and experiential learning, and it prepares mid-career professionals to become leaders and agents of change in their organizations, industries, and professions. He is the recipient of the Max H. Lavine Award for Teaching Excellence, the highest academic recognition given by CSS. He has twice been invited to present seminars on OD for the internationally known Cape Cod Institute. Bob began his career in municipal government, where he became the chief administrative officer for the city of Duluth. Following his work as the VP of Human Resources and Organizational Development for what is now the Essentia Human Resources and Organization Development for the Essentia Health System. He became chair of the management department at St. Scholastica in 2001. Bob began his OD consulting practice in 1987. When not teaching, he is the CEO and senior partner at Hartl Pearson Consulting, LLC. He works in both the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, frequently with healthcare organizations, government agencies, and in higher education. This webinar is intended to be a conversational session. So please do ask questions either on audio or in the chat. There will be time at the end as well for questions. Bob, thank you for joining us today to share how we can all learn new ways of systems and systems thinking. Take it away, Bob.
Thanks, Jeba. I appreciate it. I should warn everyone that I'm fighting a summer cold. I guess the good news about that is summer must be coming. Fortunately, I have a cough switch on my microphone, so I may need to use that periodically. Let's jump right into the presentation that I'm going to share with you today. And let's get that set up. And I'm going to get rid of the meeting controls so they don't obscure your vision. And let's go. Actually, let's go to the beginning of the presentation. Let me stop this share just briefly and get it keyed to the right part. For some reason, it doesn't want to do that, but let me try it one last time before I give up. Well, we'll just back through it. Sorry about that, but for some reason, the control isn't giving me what I want. But here we go. So I want to start when you do a presentation about systems thinking and leadership related areas, I always like the idea of starting off with a definition so we know what we're talking about. And that is for a system. This definition is from Russ Akoff, who worked at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania for many years. And he was one of the founders of what people have come to know as systems thinking and systems academic writings, probably 30 or 40 years ago, where his work was being done. So he says a system is a whole that consists of the parts which can affect its behavior or properties. The parts are interdependent. And maybe the most important part that he tried to make, or part of the definition he tried to make, is that a system cannot be divided into its parts. The performance of a system doesn't depend on how the parts perform taken separately. It depends on how they perform together, how they interact, not on how they act taken separately. Therefore, when you improve the performance of a part of a system taken separately, you can destroy the system, which is something that a lot of people don't understand, that it's not simply a matter of optimizing all of the components of a system and then throwing them together and assuming that the overall system is going to improve and be better. Actually, that approach across the board attempts to improve different parts of an organization independently usually creates problems for the system. So a system is never the sum of its parts. It is the product of their interaction. There was a famous thought experiment that was done that posed this question. If you took all of the best components of various automobiles in the world, the very best aspects of each of those cars, and put them together, what would you get? So, for example, if you took the engine of a Mercedes, you took the braking system of, say, a Continental, you did the transmission for a Lamborghini, and you took all of those parts recognized as the best in their various categories and put them together, what would you get? And the answer is a pile of junk that doesn't go anywhere, because those parts were never engineered to work together. They were engineered for a very particular vehicle. And those parts can't get anywhere. Not even the engine can get anywhere on its own. So that's the basic concept that Russ Akoff was trying to convey to people. So the next thing I like to do in doing these sessions is kind of start out with a quiz. So, and it's an okay quiz. You don't have to reveal your answer. You don't get graded on it. But I'd like you to think about this for say 30 seconds or so.
TD period. I think it was
Of
last day, Monday period.
Of the
Maybe
following, I think you're getting a audio leak through, Gemma. Of the following, which is the best example of a system? So these are some systems you may be familiar with in our region. The Essentia healthcare system, the Lean Six Sigma management system, your family, or the Oracle database system. So take 30 seconds or so to think about that question. Of the following, which is the best example of a system? And I'll tell you, there's only one system on that list. All right. Have you had enough time to think about it? The answer to the question, which is the best example of a system, is your family. And it's the only true system on that list. Even though we refer to those other entities as systems, in the pure sense of what a system is and how it operates, they're not truly systems. So let's go to a somewhat higher authority in trying to understand that point. And I'm going to share a brief video with you that talks about that very issue.
Well, the term systems thinking is really a mixed bag, and I use it very, very cautiously. First, both words are problematic, but the word system is the most problematic, because if you say the word system, the picture or image that pops up into most people's head is computer system. Like, you know, we need a systems expert here because our system's not working. The second most common association is management control system, as it's not my fault, it's the stupid system. Right? So these are the two associations that come first to people, and neither of them is what we're trying to help people understand. So whenever I'm trying to help people understand what this word system means, I usually start off by saying, are you part of a family? Everybody is a part of a family. Have you ever been seen in a family people producing consequences in the family, how people act, how people feel, that aren't what anybody intends? Yep. How does that happen? Well, you know, then people can tell their stories and think about it, but that then grounds people in not the jargon, you know, system or systems thinking, but the reality that we live in webs of interdependence. A family is a fairly close-knit one. You can kind of see most all the key players. But still, even though we can identify maybe on a list of 10 or 15 names, here's all the key people in my immediate family, still the complexity of interactions amongst all those people is obviously such that consistently families produce outcomes that nobody wants, which is the other kind of, you might say, fundamental rationale for all of this. It's not to, quote, understand systems. That's an abstraction. It's to understand how it is that the problems that are the most vexing and difficult and intransigent that we all deal with come about. And obviously, to get a perspective on those problems that gives us some leverage and some insight as to what we might do differently.
So that's Peter Senge, who many years ago wrote the Fifth Discipline, talking about systems thinking and organizational learning. Sometimes I think the easiest way to demonstrate what a system is to rely on a video explanation for it.
Bob, we can't hear you.
When you ask, what does it take in a business context
All right.
for people to start to discern non-obvious areas of leverage?
Sorry, everyone. I was having a little bit of trouble with the video that I was trying to run. So let me try it again. Usually I don't, the people who should never have trouble with the video systems in doing Zoom meetings are teachers, and I do that for a living. So let's try it again and see if I can show you the image I want, which is kind of a physical representation of systems and what that means, especially when you're thinking of it in terms of parts to a system. So let's take a look at that piece.
All right, everybody come over here. Let's form a group, a loose group here informally in this general area. All right, we're going to talk about systems thinking, but instead of starting by giving the definition, I want to have you enact physically a kind of system of systems. Here's what I want you to do. Look at your feet and the feet of those around you. Do not look up. Without speaking to anyone around you or gesture or giving gestures or anything, I want you to find two people and put yourself equidistant to those two people. So on your mark, get set, go. No straight lines, however. You got to be at an angle. You got to be at an angle to two people. Okay, very good. You all did good. What I would like you to do is turn that way and go about 3 or 4 steps that direction. Everyone else stay in place for right now. Okay? When I say go, I want you to adjust and, based on that movement, form your triangles again. On your mark, get set, go. Very good. Okay, you may now look up. You may now look up. What did we just do? We just demonstrated physically a system of systems. The three of you that were equidistant to each other were a triangle, and you formed a system of triangles. That is a system of systems. Every time one person moved, what happened? Well, you know the answer. Other people around that person had to move. And so not only was your triangle affected, but the triangles of other triangles, even though it was only one part of one system that had to move. So the indirect effects within this system of systems are much greater than the one move was. Well, why is that important, and why do we care? Why do we have to be systems thinkers? We have to be system thinkers in order to get hired, because we've asked hiring managers what they want in people, and what they're looking for is they're looking for people who can see the big picture, who can see the effect, who can visualize, much like we did here, the effect of individual decisions that people make in the workplace and how those decisions affect other parts of the organization. And if they can understand that, what can happen? What can happen is individuals cannot operate from their own perspective, but from the broader perspective of the whole organization. And therefore, you can make a decision that might not be the most value added for your system or your team, but might be a greater value added for the entire organization. And if you were a boss, wouldn't you want people that could think that way? Well, the answer is yes, of course you do. And that's why we want to become systems thinkers. So my challenge to you is, not just for this exercise, but in your life, start thinking of the systems which you impact. There are systems of relationships within your family. There are systems of interactions that happen in the businesses you do today, even as you transition. Start recognizing them. Notice them, think about them, and see the interaction. And once you start to see the interaction, even within your own personal life, you'll get better at it when you go into the private sector, where we want you all to be successful. And that's why we are concerned about being systems thinkers. I think you are all hereby certified as systems thinkers, having done this exercise. Give yourselves a round of applause.
Okay, so hopefully that physical representation of a system is helpful in understanding why it's important from the perspective of an organization. Organizations are composites of different functions, of different work units, and the action that one of those parts takes can influence all of the other pieces in the system. And that's an important point to recognize. So let me jump back to the PowerPoint and the materials that I was sharing. So we did the 2 slides. The concept of systems thinking was really something that Senge popularized back in the 5th discipline. It's a discipline for seeing the structures that underlie complex organizational situations and for discerning high from low leverage changes. In other words, where do you put your attention when you're trying to bring about change in an organization? Ultimately, it simplifies life by helping us to see the deeper patterns lying beneath the events and details of what goes on. He used a model, an iceberg model, to try to illustrate that concept and also how the various events that occur in organizations are really the result of our underlying assumptions about organizations. So, as in the case of an iceberg, there's a small part of the iceberg visible above the water level, but most of it is hidden below the water level. The events that take place in an organization, the things that we can observe, are frequent, daily. And let me give an example to kind of ground this. So let's say that you're part of an organization that spends a couple of weeks working on a major change initiative of some type. And you have made a decision, or the leadership group appears to have made a decision about what it is that they're going to do. But then the next week, when they reconvene, they rethink the issue and come up with a different decision. And if you look at that type of behavior, where a decision is made and then it's reassessed later and changed, you can see patterns where that happens at different levels of the organization and with that leadership group over a long period of time. And in turn, there are certain structures, certain rules, certain concepts of how we lead in an organization that allow those patterns to exist. And underneath it all are mental models, certain assumptions and beliefs that generate those structures and patterns. So another way to think of this model is to start at the bottom and say, our general assumptions and beliefs about leadership create certain structures. What is the organizational structure? Usually that is somebody in a senior leadership team, people at the VP level, people at directors levels, people at coordinator levels, and supervisors beneath it. Those hierarchic structures result in certain patterns, because when A top group makes a decision and then brings it back to some of the people who work for those folks. They come up with ideas about, well, maybe you didn't think of this. Maybe you should have considered what the impact on this other part of the organization was going to be before you made the decision you did. So when the leadership group reconvenes, that type of information comes back to the group. And that in turn produces the event, which was the leadership team made a decision one week and then came back and reversed it the next week. All of those things are connected. There's some basic principles about the systems approach to analyzing what's going on in organizations. One of them is that the structures that are created, and I gave the example of the leadership levels in the organization, but sometimes there are also rules of procedure, or sometimes they become embedded in contracts and procedure manuals. Those things create a significant part of all the issues that are confronted in a system. Senghi said 80 to 90% of the various things that occur in an organization are created by the structures themselves. He also said and showed through his research that different people working in the same structure will produce the same results. So it's not a matter of the individuals not being good decision makers or second guessing their thinking. It's that the structures that we've created are what produce the patterns and the individual events. First, if we're going to try to make changes, we need to work at the lower level, the mental models, the assumptions, the beliefs that produce the structures, and in turn, the patterns and events. Our assumption about, in this example, is that some hierarchy of leadership is a good idea. And that is not necessarily true. It is, however, the way many organizations are structured. So systems leadership really requires a different mindset. Leadership is a characteristic of the system, not an individual. We put a lot of stock in the idea of trying to produce leaders according to a cookbook, and people have different theories about leadership. Some people believe it is about behaviors. Some people believe it's about the traits of the leaders themselves. There are various schools of thought on that point. But the important piece is that leadership needs to be tailored to the needs of the system. And to be effective, it has to meet those needs. And if it doesn't matter what the strengths of the individuals may be. The traditional view of leadership, somebody telling people what to do, making top decisions, trying to inspire or motivate other people, represents a very individualistic and non-systemic worldview. And in this country, the United States being the most highly individualistic country in the world, that is part of how we view things in general. So it's especially strong in this country. The traditional view of leadership in the minds of many is outdated, ineffective, and mostly impossible in today's complex organizations. And the reason for that is that the work that we perform in most organizations today has become increasingly complex. And no one, regardless their talent, is going to be able to sit at the top of an organization and have a good sense for what's going on throughout the organization. It's going to be very difficult for an organization to find leaders of that type. And so the concept of a top leader really has to give rise to a different approach. The core capabilities for systems leadership involve these points. the ability to see the whole system and to develop open minds throughout the organization. For people to kind of abandon their previous views about what leadership means and develop instead kind of a very high level ability to understand the whole system. The idea of reflection and generative discussions is a very important part of being a systems leader. The strength that leaders have, one of the greatest strengths, is the ability to convene people, to bring people together. So a systems leader is going to try to bring together people who are closest to the work and sometimes to other stakeholders of the organization, not necessarily those who are inside the organization. So it could be customers, it could be other external professions that are influenced by what goes on in an organization. And a shift away from problem solving and toward transformation of the whole organization. The idea of solving problems really takes you nowhere. It makes things a little bit better than today, but it's not transformative for the organization. So I think that is the piece that I wanted to deliver today. And I was hoping that we could get some discussion going about it. And so I'll just open it to your questions and see if you either have questions or rebuttals for what I've said.
Yeah, my name's Scott.
Hey, Scott.
Not necessarily thinking that I have a rebuttal or anything like that. I will say, first of all, this whole conversation went a little bit differently than I thought it would. Got a little more heady than I thought it would. But I kind of wonder. My mind went to saying, I think of maybe the part of the systems on system thought and saying we're not paying enough attention to where these systems interact with each other, or these different components interacting with each other, and how that can be sort of a chain reaction throughout the much larger organizational system. I think that's the direction my mind went. Am I missing? Is there something that you think I should be adding into in digesting about what we just talked about?
No, I think you have a good understanding of what the issues are in systems thinking. It's that what takes place in one part of an organization is going to impact others. So what does that mean exactly? Well, let's say that I'm running an organization that's struggling financially, right? As a lot of organizations are doing right now. So I have to think about what it is I'm going to do to respond to that situation. A common way of dealing with it is to start making cuts and just try to reduce the cost of running the operation. Well, that makes kind of intuitive sense, but how you go about doing it is really the issue. So do you do across the board cuts? Let's say your organization has 2 or 3 different products or different functions that are performed in the organization. Do you say everybody is cutting 10% or 15% of their operating budgets? Or do you really think about, so which one of the products that we produce has the greatest capacity for growth right now and to produce additional revenue, and try to refocus the resources that you do have available on that product versus simply trying to balance the budget. So from a systems thinking perspective, that's a very important piece. I think a lot of organizations assume that if they can give a general direction to the entire organization, try to run each of your different organizational units as cost effectively as possible, the belief is that collectively that is going to improve the system. And the reality is that those types of cost adjustments often hurt the system and make it worse than the original circumstance. So does that help, Scott? I don't.
Oh, no, I kind of see it from a perspective of yes, it does help. And when you were talking there, it reminded me of the company that makes Gore-Tex, WL Gore.
Yes.
I don't know if you've how much you might know about them, but they are very dedicated to keeping, let's say, their business units to a certain size. And then saying if something's getting bigger than it needs to be, that they'll figure out how to reorganize so that they can break it down into a smaller size. And they do their best to let each one of those smaller units, and when I say smaller, they're usually talking about 2 to 500 unit, 200, 500 people in each of those segments. But just try not to make one segment that has 1,000 people in. They want to try to keep each of those segments smaller and let them operate as best they can autonomously. With regards to what you just, and they do a hard job of not making sure that when they make corporate policies, that it's a broad corporate policy, that it's not one that, like you were just saying, saying what's best for the whole organization. Instead, they kind of leave it up to each one of those little areas that they have.
Okay.
So I think that my point there is that they're trying to minimize the number of interactions across these different boundaries.
Yeah, and perhaps that's possible in the type of organizational structure you describe, but I would still be curious about using that approach. What are the impacts that each of the different organizational units might be having on each other?
And again, I'm no expert on they refer to their organizational structure as a lattice.
Mm-hmm.
Again, to me, I'm not sure exactly how that looks or what that means, and I'm no expert on what they do. I just know that their approach is unique. There's not a lot of organizations that approach their organizational structure the way they do.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Thanks for that question and comments. Anyone else? Any other questions that you may have? I guess the other piece that I would say in terms of systems thinking and its relevance here is that a lot of what goes on in terms of change in organizations over the years has, at least in my experience, I started my consulting practice back in 1987, if you can believe that, and been at it since. The world that we grew up in during that period of time operated on an assumption, a belief, that things were discoverable, that we could use the methods of science to come to conclusions about what was going on within an organization. And that was very much the mindset of that period of time. Later, in kind of postmodern thinking, people started realizing that it's not only what happens in terms of scientific facts, but it's also important what the perceptions are that people have of those situations, and that the perceptions sometimes become more real than the actual events that take place. So I think there is really movement in that direction toward a different style of leadership that lends itself more to systems thinking. I think a lot of what goes on in terms of bringing about change in organizations today is really about changing the narratives under which people operate and work. And until you can actually make changes in those narratives, it's going to be very difficult to make changes. And so I think from a systems perspective that it's important to use some of those principles that have emerged and how to bring about change. And at least I believe that they're probably more effective given given the assumptions that we operate on today in society. Anyone else? I apologize for the problems I had with my technology early on. I planned to do a little bit more today, but have this summer cold that has really bothered me, and so I think if you don't have questions, I think it's time to probably wrap up for today. Thank you, Christy.
Bob, there was something in the chat that said about the last video. If you could put that in the chat, the link to that last
Sure.
video, that
Sure.
would be great.
Yep, I will be happy to do that. Let me get that information. And here we go. There it is. All right. I think I am done, unless there are any other comments or questions.
All right. Well, thank you again, Bob Hartl, for sharing your expertise on systems and systems thinking. And everyone, this will be on our YouTube channel as soon as it downloads for more of a replay to reference. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jebba. Take care, everyone.
Yes, thank you.